I don't think it's ever going to feel like the right time if you're not the right person. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that, if you don't feel good about your goals or aspirations, that you're unable to achieve them, but to say, if you don't give yourself the volition or give yourself the integrity, then it will never happen. I think a lot of times we have to learn how to do things scared. Otherwise, we're not going to do them at all. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the presence of action within fear. And I think sometimes we just need to allow that sort of fear to diminish, or at least show ourselves that whatever we're fearing or whatever it is that's holding us back from our desires isn't a real prominent thing, but more so a projection of our own insecurity onto the world around us. I think we need to learn how to more so let go of ourselves enough to see what we can hold on to. Let go of ourselves enough to actually go out into the world and make the changes that we wish to see. I feel like if we're constantly battling with this fear, battling with this idea of our own failure, then we've already failed. I think if we're conflicting with confliction itself, then we've already failed. I think there's so many ways to say that, we need to sort of take a step away from our worry and doubt about ourselves. I think that's not to say be negligent of the patterns around it, be negligent of the life path that you're on or anything in that regard, but to say be aware of how fear sort of drains our energy, how fear drains our opportunities, how fear drains our perspective of life. I think doing it scared is the same as pretty much doing it for you. Recognizing that what you do is not in reference to everything around you, but in reference to everything within you. And if we can't do things for what's inside, then there's no point in doing things for what's outside. It's always about what it does for you internally instead of what it gives to you externally. I think all of our material gains and our gains as it pertains to the external world are not as valuable as whatever we have inside of us. Because what's inside of us is the one perceiving it. What is inside of us is the one putting value on these external things. And I think if we are to appreciate those external things, we have to appreciate the facility that gives it that appreciation, that gives it that value that we appreciate. I think doing it scared is also sort of akin to that. Recognizing that whatever we fear in a real external sense is a projection of the fear we have inside. A fear of how we look, a fear of how we're perceived, a fear of how we perceive ourselves at the very most. I think a lot of times we just don't want to give ourselves an excuse or opportunity to look at ourselves in a negative way. But I feel like in that way, we're already looking at ourselves negatively. What you run from has already caught you in this regard. And I feel like the more we fear how we look in this case, the more we fear how we, in that case, I think it just shows how preoccupied we are with the negativity that's already within us. I feel like we judge ourselves before we even get an opportunity to be judged. We put ourselves on the chopping block before we actually step up to the mountain. And I think we have to learn to sort of allow things to happen. Not in a negative sense, not in a loud, dangerous things to happen, but to say that we have to be very mindful of how we approach our negativity, how we approach things that don't necessarily do good for us. I think when it comes to our fear or something that doesn't do good for us, or an example is fear, I think it's important to sort of not identify with it. Not identify yourself with the shortcomings and mishaps that happen in your life, or not identify yourself with, the relative distances you put between you and your goals. I think a lot of times our fear is not necessarily placed in reality as it is placed in a projection of what we fed ourselves over and over again. I think it's very important to be mindful of what you consume. I feel like a lot of us consume a lot more than we create, and we don't create enough for ourselves. We consume so much and we just tell ourselves that that's what our reality is. That's what, we should feel about ourselves. That's who we are. Without recognizing that we have a power of creation too. We have a power to create new aspects of ourselves and new ideas, new thoughts, and new perspectives. If we don't give ourselves that opportunity, then all we're going to be is based on what we consume, based on the projections we see in the external world. And if what we see is things that we fear, then who we are is just going to be an embodiment of that fear. It's going to be an embodiment of the pain that we feel in just being ourselves. And I feel like if you can't love yourself in that regard, then everything is going to be filled with that pain. It's important to do it scared, to show yourself that whatever you're fearing is not you. It's important to do it for you because you have to recognize that everything is not necessarily in reference to everything around you, but more so reference to everything inside you. If you don't do things for you, then I feel like at times you're not really doing things. I feel like sometimes we have to apply ourselves to the life that we live and apply ourselves in an intimate way to have affection for the life we live. If you want to invest positivity in your life, or if you want to have some type of mindset that accommodates this positivity, then it's important to be present enough to implant it. If you can't be present enough in that regard, then there's no point in, I guess, overzealous thought about it. If all you can do is think about it, it's not worth thought. And I wholeheartedly think that it's possible to implant positivity. I think it's possible to give yourself that leverage and give yourself that opportunity. I just think overall it takes your presence and your agreement with a certain amount of terms and a certain amount of ideas. Like for myself, I think it's about pushing reality into what I want. Putting reality so much so within it that, I don't fear how it's going to happen. I know it is. And I don't know it is just because of delusion, but I know it is because I'm going to use every opportunity I have to make it happen. And I'm going to try my best and I'm going to be within that. I'm going to do that. I think failure is always looming across every single person's mind. I think every successful person recognizes that there's a possibility to fail. But just because there's a possibility to fail doesn't mean that you shouldn't try. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't overcome yourself in order to go and get it. I think to overcome fear is to overcome your association, your relationship with failure. I think if we can't overcome our defeat, then we should never succeed. I think if we can't learn to lose in a way, then there's no way to truly win. And when I say learn to lose, I really just mean to learn how to remain as you are regardless of external circumstances, regardless of your losses or your victories. I think that's the real way to continue to funnel your energy and be present enough to choose the things that actually contribute to you. I feel like once you give yourself that peace of mind, then moving forward is pretty much second nature. If we, abide by all of our fears and abide by those sort of ideas that limit us, then all we're going to be doing is cyclic in relative to our fear. And if we're only moving in reference to our fear, how do we plan on creating things that, go beyond that fear? I feel like we're constantly moving around something that we want to overcome, that we want to get past. And I think, your avoidance is more harmful than the problem at this time. And this is not to say like, no, everybody get on top of your fears, get on top of this, get on top of that, because I myself am doing that. I feel like I'm trying to attempt at least what I'm talking about. And I think part of it for me is recognizing where the fear comes from and being present enough to ask myself those important questions. Like if I'm in a situation where I'm feeling like, if I'm like, oh man, like I got to do this, I'm a little, why am I like that? Is it because of what I'm doing or is it because of who I am? And I think a lot of times it's because of who we are. And not in the sense of our stagnation, not in the sense of who we are being stagnant, but in the sense of who we've taught ourselves to be. I only find this situation uncomfortable because I'm uncomfortable in this situation. Not because the situation is uncomfortable, but because of my association with it, my relationship with it, my relationship with myself that allows it to be uncomfortable. And I think the best thing that we can do for ourselves is give ourselves a broader perspective so we can actually go out into the world and go out into these situations and overcome them. To recognize that we aren't the fear that we have of the situation. We're the person confronting the situation. We're the person reacting to the situation. And we are the ones who get to control our reaction. You get to control how you are. You get to control how you not necessarily feel, but how you react to your feelings. And I feel like that's one of the most important parts when it comes to our feelings. Recognizing that you need to acknowledge them. You need to acknowledge that fear. You need to acknowledge that negativity. You can't just be negligent of it. Otherwise, it's going to appear in the projections of the external world. It's going to appear in how you perceive it. And I think the best way to sort of walk past that, to take a step forward from that, is to acknowledge it. Look at it for what it is and continue to move forward. to instantiate to yourself at the very least that you're bigger than the problems that you face, because it's you who gave the problems their certain value, their certain characteristic. And when I say problems, I don't necessarily mean grand things in terms of like a world scale or societal level. I don't necessarily mean that, but it all trickles down into that. I feel like what I'm talking about is more so having to do with our own internal conflicts. Our own conflicts as it pertains to things that aren't necessarily inherently negative, or aren't necessarily things that should be taking us away from ourselves to the extent of not being present, or not being whole, or not being able to truly act in accordance to who we want to be and who we are. I think if we can't do that at the very least, then all of our action is sort of going to be confined. It's going to be constricted into what it was in the past, constricted into how we think we're perceived and how we perceive ourselves in a real way. And I think the best way to overcome this, or at least the way to focus on something like this, is to open our focus. To not be so tunnel vision onto a singular outcome or a single objective that we lose track of everything else that could be and everything else that goes into our action. I think when we focus too much on the negativity, or focus too much on a specific outcome in order to find comfort, in order to be who we are, then every other outcome and opportunity sort of takes us away from who we are. We have to recognize that no matter what happens, we are still as we are. No matter what occurs. And I think giving yourself that sort of volition and security and foundation within yourself allows you to feel good even when things are bad. I don't mean that to say like you're gonna go through some crazy traumatic negative thing and you're just gonna feel great. I don't mean that at all. I mean in our typical day to day. I mean in our basic understanding of ourselves and our basic, cycle of emotion. I think we'll be better suited to embrace positivity within that, and recognize our opportunity to sort of dispel the trance that is fear, dispel the illusion that is fear, the illusion that is, failure. I feel like a lot of us think if we fail, or if we, find something we're afraid of, we lose part of ourselves when we don't. Whatever that is a part of you, because as long as you're running from it, it has already caught you. I think we have to sort of acknowledge what we're looking at in a real way. And when I say a real way, I mean taking it down from the pedestal that we put it in. Like, for example, like I used to have a fear of like public speaking, not necessarily a fear, but I just get overly anxious about it. Then I really ask myself, what am I doing? I'm going up and I'm talking. That's pretty much it. And you have to, at times, give yourself that opportunity to see things for what they are instead of what you are. I feel like we allow our fears to project and manifest in ways that they don't actually need to. You can go up on that stage. You could do that. You could do this. Because all you have to do is do things that you regularly do. It's just the value that you've added to it. It's just the level of power and the size you've allowed it to accumulate to that's made it a prominent issue, that's made it something that you don't actually want to confront. I feel like that's the main point, really, to sort of go beyond your own nonsense in a way, to go beyond what you've taught yourself and what you've been taught about yourself, enough to create something new. I feel like the creation of something new is always in a sort of new mentality, not a analysis of what was, but an instantiation of what is and what's new. I think you can't create at the same time as you analyze, and I think a lot of us are stuck in analysis of the past in order to try to find a way to be in the present. But I think the only way that we can really find out how to be in the present is by being present and seeing. If we're only living in the past, then we're only preparing ourselves for past situations. If we're in the present, then we're preparing ourselves for present situations. And I don't necessarily know the relationship you should have to the future in regards to that. I feel like, yeah, you should have dreams and aspirations, you should have this. But I feel like to a real extent, you have to bring the future to the present. You have to bring how you expect yourself to feel after a great event in the future into the present. to better suit yourself for approaching it in the future. And that is to say that, the present is what you use to build the future. The future doesn't start tomorrow, it starts today. It starts with every action that you do. And I think all we have to do is sort of broaden our perspective of enough to accommodate our future success, to accommodate our future goals and aspirations. The first step always reveals the second in this regard, though, because I feel like sometimes it gets difficult to sort of project your whole path and think about how this is going to go, how that's going to go, because you really don't know. But all you do know and all you can know is how to take that next step where you are, doing what you can, what you have to get to where you want. And I think that's at the other end of your fear. That's at the other end of your inability to act because of your relative fear of the unknown, or fear of what is, or fear of what you don't know. And I think a lot of times we try to answer our questions without actually asking the question, or without actually listening to the solution. I feel like we allow things to be such a certain way in our heads that we think it's the way it is 100% no matter what. Like if it's something I fear doing, then that thing is worth being afraid of. It's worth being scared of, and I've associated with myself so much that whatever that is just as real as something to actually be feared. And I'm talking about like our mental projections of things, and I think again, the best way to dispel that is to sort of approach it with a certain realness, a certain understanding of what is, and a certain understanding of yourself that accommodates yourself and that fear. So recognize that fear is not a separate thing from you, and it's not bigger than what you are. It's a small aspect of your own bias that you've convinced yourself of. And once you sort of recognize that it's your own bias, then it's up to you to implant some type of good, or implant some type of perspective that accommodates your success in this area, that accommodates your courage, that accommodates your ability to overcome this fear, and accommodates your ability to do it for you. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you guys are taking care of yourself to the best extent. A lot more on the way. I'm trying to get another podcast ushered in here. I've had pretty busy weeks, but we're still moving. We're still overcoming. We're still doing what we can. So make sure you're taking care of yourself. Make sure you're treating yourself like a friend and doing what you can, what you have. And before I forget,